Hi, I'm Ken Kadet, and this is the Entrust Cybersecurity Institute podcast. Is 2026 the year that quantum gets real? Maybe the more important question is, how do you want to find out? In other words, do you want to know that a quantum computer can break traditional RSA and ECC cryptography before or after your organization has made the transition to quantum-safe algorithms? Or before or after your decrypted customer account records are for sale on the dark web? With most experts predicting a cryptographically relevant quantum computer to arrive in the next 5 years, this transition has to be top of mind for CISOs, their C-suite leaders, and their boards. But the latest global research from the Ponemon Institute says that 41% of enterprises struggle to even see their cryptographic estates, the keys, secrets, and certificates across their enterprises, let alone have the resources to implement post-quantum cryptography. Entrust sponsored the Ponemon Institute to study global enterprise readiness for the post-quantum transition and the overall level of crypto agility around the world. So today we're going to go into the data and see what it tells us about where enterprises are today and where they need to be and how we're going to get there. To do this, I am pleased to be joined by two of our resident quantum readiness experts at Entrust. First, Michael Klieman, Global Vice President of Product Management for Data Security at Entrust. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
And joining Michael is our resident PQ advocate at Entrust, Samantha Mabey. Sam, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Ken. Happy to talk to you today.
Well, welcome, and thanks you both for being here. And before we dive in, for our listeners, you can go to entrust.com now, download the PQ Trends Report, and read along with us, and I encourage you to do so. So let's just get into it. Sam, what is the data telling us about how IT pros are assessing quantum computing risk?
Yeah, so you kind of hit on it in your intro, but what is interesting is one of the questions that we asked, of course, everybody wants to know, when is that Q day going to arrive, right? So we asked, when do you think a cryptographically relevant quantum computer will be realized? And 75% said that they're expecting it within the next 10 years. So that's something we've been hearing from academics and experts pretty much across the board for some time, the 10-year plan. But what was really interesting and exciting or nerve-wracking was 51%. So exactly as you said, more than half expect the arrival within 5 years. So really, that's no surprise, considering some of the activity that we've seen at a regulatory and standard level. NIST specifically, of course, having standardized the first set of algorithms for PQC, as well as they're putting out their timelines on recommending when organizations should be looking at this actual transition. So, of course, by 2030, they're looking to deprecate traditional public key cryptography, mainly RSA, ECC, and then by 2035, looking to fully disallow it. So, of course, those timelines are right around the corner. Of course, we're four years away from the first one. Knowing how long this transition is going to take, that's something that organizations really need to think about when it comes to their journey.
Absolutely. Michael, maybe talk to us a little bit about what make this real for us a little bit. What would a real quantum attack look like, and what kinds of data are most at risk?
Well, first off, I think the one of the unknowns that we've got related to a quantum attack is it is not as if there is universal access to and transparency into when do we get to that point, right? If, for example, China develops a cryptographically relevant quantum computer before the U.S. does, it is unlikely that we are going to have visibility into the existence of that system ahead of time. So that's sort of thing number one. I think the conventional wisdom on this is that at the nation state level, you have nation state actors who are likely to exercise a cryptographically relevant quantum computer before you see it democratized to every bad guy on the planet. That said, we know specifically when it comes to China that they have been sponsoring bad actors to attack critical infrastructure in the United States already, and to infiltrate critical infrastructure in the United States already. And so I would expect that we see that kind of behavior. It's not as if it is happening at a government level, but actually the technology being applied in a way where they are giving access to organizations that can exercise those capabilities would be thing number one. Who are the targets? Critical infrastructure, financial institutions, the organizations whose disruption would have a material impact on citizens in their target countries would be who would be at risk, and that is a large range of organizations, right? CISA defines 16 verticals inside the United States as critical infrastructure, and different countries do the same thing. But this is everything from financial institutions to transportation, critical to nuclear, transportation. You go down the list, healthcare, and suddenly you see that the number of organizations at risk is pretty substantial and pretty broad. In terms of the types of problems that exist, there are really two main vectors of attack. One is related to long-lived confidential data. And so the risk there is a harvest now, decrypt later attack. And that is that bad guys are sucking up data at all times through whatever means that they can, encrypted or not. The data that is encrypted is the subject matter of this is what bad guys try and do. They suck up data, it's encrypted, and they spend their time and effort to say, hey, can I break the encryption associated with that data? And a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is just your biggest hammer in the toolbox on how to do that. So if it's PII, if it's trade secrets, if it's the configs for the nuclear power plant, all of these things are long-lived data that organizations should be in the business of protecting today, with the idea that that if it is exposed, not just today, but if it is exposed down the road, that would be a big problem. And so that's sort of problem area number one. Problem area number two is related to digital signatures applied to long-lived devices and long-lived applications. So think of a software application that is code signed today, and that software application is going to be active for 5-10 years from now. You think about the car that you're driving with a dozen certificates in it. That is going to literally be on the road for a decade. These are the things where changing applications, changing IoT devices that have a long lifespan after they are in the field is the problem where a cryptographically relevant quantum computer would break the crypto that is being used today, RCC or RSA or ECC, and this is where the timelines that Sam talked about, that NIST has put out, that the U.S. NSA has put out, that governments around the world are putting out, related to stop using this classical cryptography and start using post-quantum approved cryptography, and do it by 5 years from now. This is why that is a kind of a minimum timeline to get that work done.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and there's a lot to get ready for. Clearly, the Ponemon report shows that despite the growing awareness of all the risks that you outlined, that preparedness actually on our survey declined from last year at 41% to 40% this year. Statistically, let's call that even. But even so, it's 1 year later, and people should be even more ready. So why does it feel like organizations are falling behind at the exact moment the threat is starting to accelerate? Sam, we'll start with you.
Yeah, It's interesting because, like you say, the 40% versus 41 last year, and that's in the US. Globally, we're seeing readiness or awareness being up at 38% for organizations actively looking at this. Well, that feels low. I'd probably say that one of my most concerning metrics that I saw in this particular question, too, is that only 31% of organizations, or 31% of organizations, have not even considered the potential impact of the quantum threat. We're seeing a trend where organizations are, stopping asking, is this real? But more, taking actionable measures like, when is it going to happen? How do I make this transition? But that 31%, of course, lagging behind is definitely concerning. But to your question of why, organizations, just under half of them said that the inability to improve visibility into their cryptographic inventory is their top impediment in attaining quantum resistance. Um, so that's sort of the key problem that we're looking at. And, having visibility into their cryptographic estate, into their cryptographic inventory, has been a challenge for a while. We've seen, year over year, whether it was looking at making incremental improvements to their security posture, by trying to implement, zero trust. We've noticed that organizations are starting to realize, perhaps their cryptographic sprawl is a little bit greater than they originally anticipated when they start looking at this. Legacy systems, of course, the more things that they're securing, whether that's humans or, of course, the increasing number of machine identities, credentials are just spread everywhere, and that's your keys, certificates, and secrets. A couple of other, notable reasons why, they're not preparing at the level that they should be. Two other concerns that they said were just the lack of adequate budget. So, of course, building, PQC readiness into your budget can be an issue. And then something that we've seen year over year with everything, including, the inability or challenges in managing and deploying PKI, is that insufficient in-house expertise.
So, given everything that Sam outlined, Michael, obviously there's some organizations that are very ready. Some organizations, a lot of organizations that either aren't really dealing with the problem or completely not dealing with the problem sufficiently. What do you see as that state of preparation? How prepared are organizations really on the ground? What are they balancing here, knowing the threat?
Yeah, I think when I look at these statistics and listen to what Sam just said, I think there's the thing that I am seeing is that we have more customers than ever, more organizations coming to us than ever, asking, what don't I know, and help me understand what are these threats, what's the work that's ahead of me, what are the tooling that I need to put in place, and the subtext, I think, in looking at any sort of reduction in customers' own self-reported view of their own preparedness comes from the fact that increasingly they are asking these questions and they are going, oh man, there is a lot more here that has to get done than I thought before. And the light bulb is starting to go off more and more related to that.
And so it's not in the budget, or it's not on the roadmap for what our plans are this year, that kind of thing.
Well, and the scope of the work that is ahead of them, and the complexity of the work that is ahead of them is starting to crystallize for them. And we see this in organizations of all sizes. There are some organizations, massive, telecommunications companies, for example, who take the shift to post-quantum super seriously. They are systematically looking at what are massive estates of technology infrastructure that they have to secure, and saying, how systematically do I go through the process of inventory everything that I've got, do a risk assessment associated with all of those applications, not just the crypto, right? But the applications that the crypto is securing. Which of those applications are going to need to be touched? Which are we going to actually pull out of service altogether because it will be too much work to upgrade those systems to being PQ ready? Which of those systems are ones where we would actually accept the risk, and we're not? Again, it's the work associated with it is too much, but we think the risk is actually manageable. And then there's everything else, and then there's all of the systems that I've got. They're production systems, they're key systems inside the organization. They have to be secured. Okay, how do I then systematically go about saying, okay, what's the work that has to get done there? And that is updating code, updating infrastructure, working with third-party suppliers, testing, and ensuring interoperability with all of the other systems that these applications interact with. And at enterprise scale, this can be a daunting task. So we've got, the organizations who are trying to systematically plan for this. And then you've got organizations that are smaller, right? Your $1 billion company, your, $5 billion company, they're going to have internal IT departments. They're going to have internal InfoSec departments. But these are organizations that are generally racing to just stay on top of the latest threats, let alone plan for massive, sort of existential infrastructure-related changes. And as they're coming to terms with, here's the work that is necessary. Same thing that a better resourced organization might be focused on systematically. They, smaller organizations are saying, okay, well, how do I just make some progress, right? And this is an area that we might touch on in a little bit, but I think there's the conventional wisdom of follow the chevrons from left to right to say, okay, first let me find out what I've got, and then prioritize it, and then figure out what the remediation plan is, and then put it into place, and then monitor it, and rinse, wash, repeat until I'm done. And the guidance that we're increasingly giving to organizations is, there's nothing wrong with that process, and it makes logical sense. But if there are applications that that are production applications, they're critical applications, where the inventory is for the cryptographic assets, the importance of that application, you can make some changes to that today. Well, just go do it. And do you have the technology in place in order to make those updates where you're both following the process, but also making the actual changes that are necessary along the way as much as possible, and reducing your risk where you can.
Well, and I think yeah, absolutely. And I think there's one area, I think one thing you're touching on is that idea of bringing cryptographic agility into your organization, right? That ability to make those cryptographic transitions, manage cryptographic assets like certificates and keys. And it sounds like one area that companies are trying to deal with is that the push by the CA Browser Forum to mandate that public certificate lifetimes start to shrink from 398 days to just 47 days by 2029, with several steps in between. So what does that mean for organizations that are already struggling with all these different processes and priorities that you were describing? And how do they deal with it?
Yeah, I think I think this is an area where the operational complexity in dealing with cryptographic security inside of organizations is really it's started to set the light bulbs off for people, because it's not just about when is Q day and when do I need to update everything. It is an increasing set of demands that are coming from all angles associated with managing this in the certificate space and publicly trusted TLS certificates. The shift to 47-day certificates is one, just for the record, that is taking effect in basically less than 6 weeks from now. Is step one is certificate lifetime validity for publicly trusted TLS certificates is shifting from 398 days to 200 days as of March 15th of this year, of 2026. The effect of that is that an organization that does nothing, basically the cost associated, whatever your cost is associated with rotating those certificates today, and whatever the operational risk is, likelihood that you're going to miss a certificate renewal and you will have to scramble to either mitigate or to prevent an outage on a critical system. If you do nothing, that cost and that risk is going to double in 6 weeks. And a year from now, in March 15th of next year, that will further reduce to 100 days. And then, as you pointed out, March 15th of 2029, 4 years from now, is shifting to 47 days. So the effect of that is that whatever that cost is, whatever that operational risk is, if an organization does nothing, that risk and that cost is going to increase by a factor of 8 if organizations do nothing. And the guidance that we provide to companies is, this is not about how do I deal with that higher frequency rotation of certificates. It is to highlight that the policy that is driving it is not in their hands. The policy that is defining that validity period has some good intent behind it. There's good rationale behind it. However, that policy is being driven by the browsers. That policy is being driven by operating system vendors, and it is with not the interest of the individual firm in mind, but the interest of relying parties and consumers who are 8 billion consumers who are using web browsers to access any systems anywhere. That's what they're solving for. And so for the individual firm, the guidance that we provide is to say, look at who is defining the policy associated with your cryptographic usage in the first place. Make sure that you're taking that into account. With a policy and a risk view into this, what you quickly realize is that when policy is in somebody else's hands, the risk to you as the individual organization is the highest. And so the guidance that we've got is use the shift to 47-day certificates as the wake-up call to revisit how are you using PKI in the first place? What's the right PKI for the right applications where you're reducing risk and you're reducing cost overall? And that takes you to default to private PKIs and use publicly trusted certificates only in the absolute cases where you must do that. To your point related to crypto agility, the principles here are still the same, right? You want to have automation under the covers that can be private or public. You want to make sure that the right testing is in place, that you've got the right resilience in place across each one of these applications, that you are looking at the interoperability, dependencies there, and all of those same principles, as we're talking about the shift to 47-day certificates, are the same principles that go into effect when you're talking about the shift to post-quantum.
And one of the things I want to highlight too from the study, again, sort of exactly what Michael's saying. So operational complexity, it's increasing. It has been for a while, and we've got a lot of things on the roadmap coming up for customers. today, according to the study, 68% have said that managing keys, certificates, and secrets already is extremely or very difficult. So again, that is concerning, knowing all of these multiple forces are sort of converging at once. So if anything, it does highlight that automation, lifecycle management, they're non-negotiable. Same capabilities that we're looking at and talking about for PQC and making that transition as successful and organized as possible applies for all of these situations coming up.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is that visibility into cryptographic assets is basically the natural starting point on the road to cryptographic agility, on the road to quantum readiness. So Sam, what can organizations do to get that visibility that they need?
Yeah, so you're hearing visibility from us. We've heard it from the report. It's the defining obstacle that a lot of our respondents said at 41%. Again, the visibility into all of your cryptographic estate, your hardware, software, your keys, certificates, secrets. We know that this is step number one. We've heard it from regulatory bodies and standard bodies. The path forward really comes with building out your sort of cryptographic strategy. This is for PQ preparedness. This is for all these complex issues coming up, making sure that you can centralize your cryptographic security, have that visibility, have that automation built in, lifecycle management of all your credentials, your keys, certificates, and secrets, but also having that sort of central policy and governance implemented as well. One of the things too that we've heard, we talked about, some of the obstacles for organizations when it comes to their preparedness, whether it's the lack of adequate budget or insufficient in-house expertise. When it comes to PQC readiness, we had that joint fact sheet that was issued by NIST, NSA, and CISA that said, talk to your vendors, make sure that your vendors have this roadmap. You're looking at cryptographic inventory, you're make sure that your vendors can support that. You're looking at the transition to PQC and these standardized algorithms. How can your vendors help support that transition as well? So I think that that's a huge thing, as well as, looking at budgeting, making sure that any investments that you do make into your cryptographic security or, any improvements that you make are all supported, are all PQC ready.
Michael, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. Yeah, I'll add on that that when we talk about our own product strategy associated with this, there's an important principle that we've got related to cryptographic visibility and compliance management in general, and that is that we're taking a super open view to this, and that is while in the same breath we've got world-class PKI and certificate lifecycle management, HSMs, key management capabilities, now file encryption capabilities, all of which can solve the underlying infrastructure problems. We recognize that from a cryptographic visibility perspective, the persona inside the organization who cares is oftentimes a different person inside of an organization. Right now, you're talking about who's responsible for risk, what's the CISO or the VP of security or the CIO's, what's their mandate? How do they report out to the C-suite? How do they report out to the board on where do I have risk inside of the organization? How am I doing against mitigating that risk? And to be able to successfully do that, you need to be able to pull in the data from all corners, right? And from our perspective, that is not just from our solutions, but for any solutions, whether that is another PKI, another CLM, another HSM, another key vault that exists inside of the organization, and being able to pull that information into a centralized repository and apply consistent tops-down enterprise-wide policy against that, so I can now understand how am I doing and audit how I actually am doing against that policy that is centralized. That's essentially bringing to life the notion that that's been knocked around for years of creating a cryptographic center of excellence inside of an organization. Is this our approach to compliance management and that centralized visibility is to deliver for those personas who need that, regardless of where the crypto is inside of your organization, and that's something that we've been at for many years.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about organizations who are, not quite ready or not far along the journey at this point. For the organizations who are preparing for the post-quantum world, what does the report say about where they are in that journey, Sam?
Yeah, so of those preparing, and again, we have the respondents coming in at 38% are actively preparing. What we're seeing is that 44% are building their cryptographic strategy right now, whereas 32% are compiling their cryptographic inventory. Again, just looking at what it is that they have, hardware, software, credentials, or ensuring that the organization is crypto agile, so able to make that transition from traditional public key cryptography to PQC. Of those who are actively deploying PQC, we've got 38% that are testing, while 33% are actually doing the implementation. And then respondents, when we've asked them about, their approach to this implementation, they seem evenly split between the adoption of a hybrid approach, which is essentially combining PQC with traditional public key cryptography versus pursuing pure PQC support or approach, sorry. And, we see even some of the standards coming out globally that are sort of, split between the two as well, where we see NSA in North America suggesting the pure PQC approach, where, BSI in Germany and ANSI in France, suggesting the hybrid approach. So respondents seem pretty split there as well. And talking about the topic of crypto agility, earlier. So we're seeing that only 26% of organizations report having fully implemented a crypto agile strategy. 31% having partially implemented one. And of course, we know that crypto agility is going to be absolutely critical to make this initial transition to PQC. But, we can also expect, because these algorithms aren't necessarily fully baked, where, RSA, we've been using it for 30 years and ECC for 20, we can expect to make this initial transition as well as, future transitions. So crypto agility is going to be absolutely critical today and in the future.
Michael, what's your take on this? How are organizations? Do you feel like with the companies you're talking about that are on the road, are they still feeling heavy challenge, or are they feeling like they've kind of got a plan to implement at this point?
I think there's no question that there's a big challenge ahead for organizations, right? And this is part of the guidance out of NIST and the other regulatory, reg setting bodies, and that is when you look at even small changes to cryptographic systems that have happened over the years. These are changes when you look at the dependencies between systems, and the skill sets that Sam's talked about before, and the limited skill sets that she's talked about before. Changes of even small nature of cryptographic systems in the past they're generally timed at a decade. Takes a decade to make a small change. We are not talking about a small change. And RSA was, here's the algorithm that, the first paper that came out related to RSA was in the early 70s. The same algorithms have been in use since the dawn of the internet. And prior to there being cell phones, prior to this notion of digitize everything, it's been likened, the shift to post-quantum has been likened to the Y2K problem. And all I can say is Y2K happened in 1999 before there was an iPhone. Right. And before you think about what's happened in a quarter of a century in terms of digitization of the world and dependency on technology and InfoSec on every single aspect of life and every aspect of business, we're talking orders of magnitude more impact and more technical complexity than exists. And I think this is where that analogy breaks down, right? I think where it does come to life is what happened with the recognition of a massive change and a massive risk. Organizations and governments and regulatory bodies around the world back in the 90s mobilized to say, we got a big problem and let's make sure that we get in front of that problem. And when they did, and when people put their minds to it, they were able to get in front of it. And I think we need to do the same thing when it comes to the shift to post-quantum. And I think this gets actually back to the notion of recognize that it's just the challenge of finding here's where all the cryptographic assets are inside your environment. That alone is proving to be a big hurdle for most organizations, let alone. Well, for every one of those cryptographic assets, now I have to change the system and
Right.
update the system in which it's being used. This is why the guidance that I've got on this and where we see organizations that are making some progress are the ones who are not just going linearly and serially through each one of the steps of that process of how do I think about this, but they're in all of those steps at the same time. Where I know that I've got something that can be updated, I'm going to start working on it right now so that I don't find myself in a position where it's too late. Where, hey, you know what, the complexity and the resourcing that I've got and the skill sets that I've got are they are more than I can actually tackle when there actually is a clear and present danger, and we have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer on the scene. We need to be in a position where these systems have been updated well before we get to that point.
I going back to that Y2K analogy, I've always just thought it was crazy that so many people complained almost that Y2K was a big nothing, because so many thousands of people had to work so hard to make that not happen. And that's going to be the case with quantum as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you actually look at the history here, part of the challenge actually does come back to a skill set issue, and that was it was around the shift to Y2K that much of the India based computer science industry was created to go and create an army of people specialized in the ability to go and update these systems, right? We need an army of people who can go and do the same thing related to post-quantum. And that, for us is why increasingly partners for us, global system integrators, value-added resellers, people who have the ability to concentrate expertise in this space and can distribute that across multiple organizations is super important.
Yeah, they've got an opportunity. Well, so, and this may lead into my next question. And I think the question I want to use to kind of wrap things up for listeners here. What is one thing you would advise organizations struggling with these challenges to really try to take on in 2026? And let's, as we look at that, maybe beyond visibility, we know visibility is going to be the challenge, but like, as you get into that, like what should organizations try to take on? And Michael, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think I hit on it before, but I think there's for me, it is what can I do practically? And practically, back to the shift to 47-day certificates, is, I would advise organizations to look at that as here is a time-driven infrastructure update that you need to make, where the best outcome is that you are focusing in on crypto agility and having the infrastructure in place that solves not just for the 47-day challenge, but also brings along PQ readiness at the same time. From a budgeting standpoint, from a project management standpoint, from a let me knock off a couple of things at the same time and get some efficiency. This is what I would leverage as a time pressure driven event around 47 days, and rethinking PKI in particular, which is where the risk associated with post-quantum is the greatest, and to bring through your readiness on post-quantum at the same time.
I love what Michael was saying earlier too, just about, how long RSA has been in play and how everything that we need to secure has changed, since the internet. RSA has been in place, and here we are with mobile devices and smart cars. So what we need to secure has changed drastically. And we're now at this point where, these multiple forces, these are converging. We're dealing with a lot of things at once. And now security needs to change. We need to rethink everything. So, I think that when it comes to the PQ transition, I think that perfection shouldn't be the enemy of progress. Visibility, of course, is a challenge. But don't let, struggles with visibility prevent organizations from making the transition in certain places and those incremental improvements to their security posture. And of course, we talked about automation and lifecycle management, absolutely critical, whether we're talking about the PQC transition or any of these other, issues that have arisen recently. And I think that that's what makes the difference for organizations between, resilience and disruption.
Absolutely. We'll leave it at that. Sam, thank you. Michael, thank you. This conversation's covered a lot of ground, and I think it's a really important one for any enterprise in 2026 and beyond. So thank you for this. I think this has been a really good conversation. And thank you for everyone listening. Thank you to everyone listening. Our podcast was produced by Megan Gable and Stephen Damone. And if you like this, we always encourage you to rate and review the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we'd always love to hear from you. You can email your opinions and ideas to cybersecurityinstitute@entrust.com. And if you've made it this far, I encourage you to watch this space next month as our podcast relaunches with a new name and a new identity.